Have you ever wondered just how Singapore actually survives as an independent city-state? With a total area smaller than New York City, how Singapore survives is not just a question of how it stays independent, but also how you feed a city when the entire country is just that city. Yet Singapore famously isn't just surviving, but thriving, being possibly one of the most influential countries in the Asia-Pacific region. But given how countries of this kind of status usually have, land area, just how does Singapore survive? How does its government work? How do its institutions work? Is it divided into different subdivisions? Yes, it is. And how does the country feed its 5 million people? This video is sponsored by Fabulous. Singapore is widely touted as the world's only true functioning city-state. After all, Vatican City is just a private country for a bunch of incels, and Monaco is still very much dependent on France. Singapore, however, wasn't always meant to be a country. Before 1957, the British administered various colonies in this general area, with all except Brunei eventually uniting into the Federation of Malaysia. However, just 2 years later in 1965, Singapore was effectively kicked out of this federation, making Singapore, in a sense, the country that didn't initially want to be a country. If, however, there were any city that could thrive as an independent country, it would definitely be Singapore. Singapore's geography is far from perfect, we'll get to that later, but it does have a certain amount of blessings. The most obvious, of course, is its position, directly at the end of the Strait of Malacca, putting it at one of the world's primary choke points for international shipping, with Singapore growing to become one of the richest and most developed countries in the world. But despite the impression you might have gotten from my videos, geography doesn't always determine everything, as this could theoretically also have been the fate of Batam, a mere stone's throw away from Singapore, assuming you can throw a stone 17 kilometers, as Singapore spent much of its adolescence as a much poorer country. Through a myriad of measures taken by the government over the decades, however, the country started to attract the attention of multinational corporations and invest in new sectors, nowadays boasting one of the highest GDPs per capita in the world. However, this video is about how Singapore survives, not how it became rich. Which I guess is my gentle way of saying I'm not an economist, and I know I will swear word something up with this part since it's not actually the focus of the video. Okay, so first, Singapore has subdivisions? Like states and provinces? Good guess, but actually no. Singapore is a city, but of course still a large one. And just as it's more efficient to divide London into boroughs, or Berlin into boroughs, or New York into boroughs, Singapore is primarily divided into 5 Community Development Council, or CDC, districts, each with names I hopefully don't have to explain the meaning of. Singapore can also be divided into town councils, themselves further divided into constituencies, which are divided by the elections department, under the control of the Prime Minister's office. At the national level, Singapore's government is divided into an executive, legislative, and judicial branch. Singapore has a president and a prime minister, with the former serving as the head of state and the latter as the head of government. The president, currently Halimah Yacob, serves a 6-year term which can be renewed, and is elected by popular vote. The Prime Minister, currently Lee Hsien Loong, is appointed by the President as the MP who might best sway the current parliament. Singapore's government is defined as a unitary parliamentary republic. Being a unitary state means the government effectively has the final say on what goes on anywhere within its borders, whereas federal states generally leave more of the responsibility to the subdivisions over what happens within their borders. Parliamentary in this context is a government effectively formed by whichever party or coalition of parties forms a majority in parliament. And republic is a convoluted term. Okay, I already made that joke in my Chinese government video. Singapore is in a unique position, sort of physically and metaphorically, because this whole being independent and actually thriving thing is not necessarily something that most major cities might be able to pull off. Singapore, however, has not only thrived as a city-state, but also has a fighting chance. It's not like the city-states in the Civilization games, they actually do a lot of stuff diplomatically. Singapore maintains close ties with many of the world's most powerful nations, while also staying neutral in world affairs. Maintaining somewhat of a neutral streak that I'm sure makes the likes of Switzerland say, meh, I'm neutral about it. Singapore is known for its close friendships with both the US and China. Relations between Singapore and the US date all the way back to 1836, when the US opened a consulate there, back when Singapore was a British trading post and the US only barely touched the Pacific. Singapore and China, meanwhile, have shared diplomatic relations since as relatively recently as 1990, with Singaporean leadership generally believing working with China to be an imperative for any country based in this general area. Since then, they have been able to maintain generally amicable relations with both powers at the same time. The reason Singapore is in a position to befriend world powers without being imposed on by either one is largely due to its strong economy, making it a desirable partner. Singapore also maintains a strong military, having the 9th largest military budget in Asia, and spending more on its military than any other country in Southeast Asia. The Singapore Armed Forces are also allowed use of facilities in many different countries around the world, mainly for training purposes. As the country is a massive center of business and finance, with many large banks being based in Singapore, you could probably imagine, is a country that very much wants a stable world. This is obvious, though we can see the effects firsthand with Hong Kong, with multinational corporations often known to move out whenever China starts making incursions. Hey, wait a minute, why hasn't Mr. Beat made a Hong Kong versus Singapore video yet? Compared to some of the largest cities on Seoul 3, Singapore isn't actually all that big. With a population of 5.6 million, sure, it's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, there's probably a fine for that. But being a country with less land area than New York City, yet still supporting such a large population, the question becomes, how does Singapore get food and water to its citizens? If you could turn every last square meter of Singapore's land area into farmland, Singapore could produce enough food annually for 3.6 million people. So this plan wouldn't work because 2 million Singaporeans would still go hungry. Also, not all of Singapore's land is even arable in the first place. Also, where would everyone live and work if all the housing and businesses were leveled into farmland? Also, this idea would be incredibly stupid. So yes, aside from ambitious plans to produce as much as 30% of its food by 2030, obviously Singapore imports most of its food, though not necessarily all from Malaysia. Singapore does produce some of its own food. However, around 90% of their food comes from everywhere from China to Australia to Europe and the Americas. Eggs mainly come from Malaysia, though chicken may also come from Brazil, as does pork alongside Indonesia. Beef mainly comes from Australia and also YouTube, though fish and rice come from closer to home in Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and India. The water, on the other hand, that's pretty much all from Malaysia. The two countries signed 2 different agreements, back when they were one country. An agreement signed between the City Council of Singapore and the state of Johor in 1961 allowed Singapore to draw an unrestricted quantity of raw water from the Tebrau and Skudai rivers, in exchange for 12% of the filtered water. While this agreement expired in 2011, a 1962 agreement set to expire in 2061 allows Singapore to extract just under 1 million liters of raw water per day from the Johor River, in exchange for 2% of the filtered water. This imported water is one of Singapore's so-called 4 national taps, the others being desalinated water, water from local catchment, and reclaimed water under the name New Water. Having virtually no natural resources of its own, Singapore serves as an interesting inverse example of the resource curse, a phenomenon where resource-rich countries, think Afghanistan and Dr. Congo, tend to also be poor and unstable. Either way, while we might call it Singapore, perhaps we should call it Singa-Rich. Okay, I literally made that joke about 3 years ago, Jesus Christ. Okay, roll call. How many of you have completely abandoned your New Year's resolutions? Okay, how many of you even remember what they were? Then perhaps you need something that is absolutely fabulous, and is called Fabulous. Please laugh. Fabulous is an app that can help you build a better daily routine to live happier and healthier, through goals you can either pick out individually or through one of their curated lists. Changing old habits and building new ones can be hard, but Fabulous can help coach you to better habits through daily itineraries that are 100% personalized and based on behavioral science. It basically turns your phone into a little personal trainer, but not just for working out, but also for sleeping better or having more energy or even being more creative. For instance, you can set your morning ritual to the old drinking water and eating a full breakfast or taking a walk, but you could also add rituals like taking some time out of your schedule to learn something, like I've been doing. Hey, by the way, did you know Thomas Jefferson devised a decimal-based measurement system not long before the metric system was developed? I learned something. Start building your ideal daily routine. The first 100 people to click my special little link below will get 25% off a premium subscription to Fabulous.